So, other things. Dungeons and Dragons. A lot of people are very curious. Like, I got, like, the last few days, like, 24 emails asking, like, you never followed up on Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition. What did you think about that? You promised you'd tell us what you thought. You didn't! Liar! Okay, here's what I think. Pretty much exactly what I said in my last review. I was pretty much spot on, if I do say so myself. I have played a great deal of Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition. I have a weekly group, and we play it all the time. I dungeon master it. I don't wear a black turtleneck, but I'm a pretty good dungeon master, I think. Let me see. Here's what I think. I like it a lot, and I still don't fully understand the flack that it gets, almost seemingly for just existing. I think pretty much there's kind of a cadre of people who just reject anything WotC throws out as instantly evil and bad. I do agree they're kind of the evil empire and driving a lot of small press companies out of business, because really when it comes to like RPG publishing, there's wizards and then there's not much else. I do have some complaints though. Like I said, it's very balanced, and I think it's a lot of fun, and I think if you give it a chance, and I don't think a lot of people give it a chance, that it's actually very entertaining. And I think even for terrible games, a good DM can forgive for a lot. Like, for instance, I don't like Werewolf. A lot of people love Werewolf, that White Wolf game, but that's because I've actually never seen a good game of it run. If I saw a good game of it run, I think I would really change my opinion on that. I think really the DM makes up for a lot. So even for some of the weaknesses, the perceived weaknesses of games. And that the Dungeons & Dragons thing does have weaknesses. For instance, there are a lot of update books that keep coming out, like Martial Power, the Player's Handbook 2, and all of those have a lot of different races and a lot of different classes in them. And those are very well balanced, but I wouldn't let yourself be fooled by thinking there's a lot of different classes. And what I think the problem is I think the number of classes is going to skyrocket, and I mean skyrocket huge. There's already too many classes with the inclusion of the Player's Handbook 2. And what I think that's going to kind of turn into is kind of like, you know, the OCCs for Rifts, where there's like 300 OCCs and nobody can keep them straight, and they're not necessarily as balanced as people think they are. Rifts doesn't even pretend at balance, but Dungeons & Dragons does. But there's still a lot of classes to keep straight, and I think a lot of those classes can lose their identity when it comes to, you know, having that many choices available, when in reality there aren't that many choices available. Dungeons & Dragons essentially has 4 classes, and only 4. There's the Striker, there's the Defender, there's the Leader, and the, like the Controller. Something like that. And that's pretty much it. It's very MMORPG in that styling, and where there's a guy who does a lot of damage to one target, there's a guy who controls a lot of monsters on the field with status effects, there's the leader character who can, you know, heal allies and inspire them with buffs, and there's kind of like there's like a tank or a debuffer or something like that. In that regard, there's 4 or 5 classes, and pretty much every class in the books is a slight variant on that theme. For instance, the leader. There's the cleric, there's the warlord, and like a bard. And I was actually kind of frustrated with the fact they included the bard in the Player's Handbook too, because I always thought the bard was really the warlord. I thought they just changed the name of bard to warlord, seriously, because I thought the word bard sounded gay. And I don't mean gay is a bad thing. I'm just saying, like, nobody takes a bard seriously because they're a bard. You know, you look at a bard and you think of a guy strumming a lute in the middle of a fight, and you're like, that doesn't make sense. So let's just call him a warlord, because all of a sudden, warlord sounds badass. Warlord sounds like he'll mess you up. It's not a bard, you know, like, you keep thinking of the guitar strumming guy. So you change it to warlord, and all of a sudden, he's a combat viable class. He heals you with the force of his personality. That's one of the weaknesses, is a lot of the classes don't make much sense. I still don't really get the warlord who is able to heal you from the most grievous wounds by force of his personality. Like, if you're wounded, you're on the ground, you're bleeding to death, he can just go, "Get up!" And you go, "I feel better." That's the warlord. It seems very metagame in that sense, and it seems very anti-Dungeons and Dragons in that sense, because you're not healing the guy with magic, you're healing the guy because you're likable. Or you're very forceful and the guy gets up. And I understand there are differences, but when you read the book, it really doesn't seem like there's that much of a difference between the classes a lot of times. Like, the cleric and the warlord are almost identical. There are differences. People are going to email me saying there are very key differences. I know there are differences, but on paper they look very much the same, and that's because they are the same. They're both leaders, and they both essentially do the same role in combat. So you're basically looking at a lot of variations on a theme. The difference between the classes is really up to the player to distinguish in his role-playing. And a lot of times you can't count on players to be good enough gamers to do that. So sometimes you'll see a warlord and a cleric, and they basically play them the same way. There's not really that much distinction. It comes down to role-playing, and that's a major weakness in some games, when you kind of have a group that's more interested in this hack and stuff. Like AD&D, the differences were much more clear. Trying to think of other weaknesses. It seems to be very restrictive in the number of monsters that are available. When you're a DM, anyway, when you're looking through the monster manual, you try to be very balanced in the way you throw out encounters, or at least you try to be. And so you're kind of restricted to choosing monsters that are within a certain level of the party. So, like, if it's a level 5 party, you gotta kind of choose monsters between level 5 and level 7. Pardon me, to keep the encounters balanced. Otherwise, it gets too hard or it gets too easy. And for a while that works out, but you start to run out, or the encounters start feeling very samey. Like you keep running into the same monsters, and that's not as exciting because you can't just keep saying, you could go open the door, there's more orcs. So I think there's kind of a distinct lack of variety in the monsters right now. There will be other monster manuals. I think Monster Manual 2 is one of the next releases. But you gotta kind of get creative when it comes to the monster layouts, kind of building encounters. That can be a little harder than it looks when you're looking at the list. It's kind of hard to explain unless you've done it yourself, but there are alternatives. Also, I think that some of the printed adventures, in fact, a lot of the printed adventures for D&D, especially the ones that come out of WotC, are very weak. I found they have very good maps and they have very good supplementary material, but on the whole, I think the plot lines are very weak. And I don't know. I actually think the encounters are very unimaginative. Like for an entire encounter, like every encounter will be the same encounter. Like you'll keep running into lizardmen in one room and lizardmen in another room, or zombies in one room and zombies in this room and zombies in this room. I sometimes think that, and there's one called, I think, Thunderspire Labyrinth or something like that, where it's just the encounters literally make no sense. It's like you're encountering wildly different creatures in every room because there's some kind of magical dimensional rift that's throwing different types of monsters in every room, like Lost. Like, oh, there's a polar bear. You're like, what? But there are some good supplements to get out there that do help in the restrictive number of monsters, and there are some very good adventure modules out there that I like a lot, and most of them are released by Goodman Games. There's a book called like Black Sturge's Dungeon Denizens, which is almost invaluable at this point for kind of broadening your spectrum of monsters right now. It's very good. And also they have a line of very good adventure modules. The modules, however, are, like I said, those have the somewhat unimaginative monster encounter layouts. Like, it'll just be like, oh, you face 6 dwarves, or you face 6 goblins. You need to kind of shake up the encounter balance a little bit in that you can't just have like 6 soldier creatures fighting you. Otherwise, the encounters can kind of drag on because they have a lot of hit points, and in that regard, the combats can go on about 15-20 minutes too long, and that's a long time to be gaming. It helps to kind of sprinkle minions out throughout your encounters, otherwise it takes too long. Other things I'm very excited to see, after much delay, A Song of Ice and Fire RPG has been released by Green Ronin Games, but it's hard to find. I had to order it special from their website, and it still hasn't arrived yet, but I only ordered it a few days ago. I'm very excited to see what they've done with the Song of Ice and Fire, because I love a Game of Thrones, and I would love to play an RPG of that. I'll review that one as soon as I get it, and I would love to read that one.